Welcome to Mundaria Legends. I am your host, Michael Stone. I have been thrilled to see how many more people are beginning to listen to these stories, and honestly perhaps a little frightened too, because right now I can confirm that Mundaria Legends is being played in every continent on Earth, with the possible exception of Antarctica. So thanks for tuning in all. Now, because we are approaching about the halfway point in this first season, I am probably not going to include new character submissions from the audience in these next episodes. We have a bunch of characters we've already introduced who deserve to see their own stories more fully fleshed out, and I want to make sure that we have the time in these episodes for that purpose. Also, remember, if you enjoy the show, there are 3 easy ways you can support us. First, you can like, comment, subscribe, and leave a review. Second, you can join us on patreon.com, where for as little as $3 a month, you can ensure the show keeps going and gain access to unique benefits like ad-free shows. Third, and most importantly, you can tell other friends who you think would like this show about Mundaria Legends, because the best way to enjoy a story is with someone else. Now, without further ado, we bring to you, and excuse my Latin, episode 6, Causus Belli. King Aglam, I have come to expect many disappointing traits from the shell-headed, scum-infested bottom-feeder that you are. But even you must perceive how atrociously stupid it is to ask your men to stay on this island. The lava flow will be here in just under 12 hours at best, and yet I receive word that you are denying the human contingents the use of their own ships to escape. As she spat out each syllable in her native Marinese, Senator Loella's eyes were alight with a burning indignation that could cut through steel. Her saffron-tinged facial fins at her temples flared. The morning sun was shining dimly through the bay water under which Aglam and Loella were meeting, contributing an out-of-place sense of calm to the tense conversation between the Maelli leaders. "We are not going to retreat from a war I know we will win, Senator," Aglam retorted, the purple scales on his tail glinting as he defiantly swung it in the water. "Too many Maelli, merfolk and human alike, have lost their lives defending our foothold here for me to give it up so easily." Senator Loella swam up closer to Aglam, barely suppressing the urge to smack his head off his shoulders. "You have lost, Aglam. Even if you were to have every hydromancer summon all the water they could from the ocean, in unison, to try to drown out this flowing molten rock, Mount Rurin has been erupting since before the Throne Wars. The Drakonids have unleashed a natural disaster here that no amount of brute strength can freeze, cool, or stop. No matter what you do, it will just keep coming. Yet you would rather let these soldiers die just to satisfy your myopic sense of pride? Do you not see how self-destructively stupid this makes you look to your people?" Aglam's grimace, which had already given the monarch the appearance of having slurped a toxic blowfish, soured even further. "And what would you have me do, Loella? Retreat? You would have our people suffer this kind of blow to our nation's honor?" Senator Loella threw her hands upwards, utterly disbelieving what she was hearing. "Your people don't have the luxury to be concerned with their pride when they are scrambling to save their lives." Aglam sneered at Loella. "Ah, yes, that is real rich coming from you, Senator. You are concerned about nothing but honor, my dear." That caught the senator off guard. "What could you possibly mean by that?" she angrily scoffed, though her voice had gone more quiet, somewhat less certain of herself. The change in Loella's voice did not go unnoticed by the king. "You know exactly what I mean, Loella. You routinely accuse me of gross arrogance. Yet, The very first thing you did when you showed up to this island was engage in an ill-conceived attempt to end this war all by yourself. And we see how well that went, don't we? And then, the first thing you do when you woke up after failing to kill that Drakonid is ask me to call a ceasefire with the Drakonids to allow you to parley with a traitor, Prince Chiral. You, a sitting senator who has sworn to protect the interests of her people, thought it fit for all our people's efforts on this island to win this war stop, just so that you could get answers. You wanted the whole world to stop just for you, so that you could pursue this farcical delusion of making things up with your ex-husband. That's a particularly strong flavor of obsessiveness with honor, Loella. That's what we call wounded pride. Loella kept her stern, furious gaze trained on her king. I am not trying to make things up with Prince Chiral anymore, Aglam, she quietly iterated. Whatever my husband has done, he has made it clear that things have now ended between us. She couldn't prevent the hot red feeling of shame rise to her cheeks as she admitted it, but there was no point pretending matters between her and Chiral were anything otherwise. At one point in time in my life, I may have cared more about my reputation as a scorned wife. And yes, it's true. I have been too focused on my own reputation amongst our people for far too long. Bitter memories briefly flashed in Loella's mind. Harsh words and empty excuses. A broken string of pearls floating in the water. Shaking her head to rid her of the dark vision, Loella again gave a resolute stare to Aglam. That is why I have to chase every avenue for peace that I can. I need to make amends for the life I have lived, Aglam. That is why I must insist that you let our people retreat, now, before you put all of them at risk. King Aglam shook his head. You can moralize all you want, Loella. But at the end of the day, you still think this is all about you. You just said it. You're more concerned with your own need to redeem yourself than you are with what our people actually need. Loella turned away from Aglam, fuming. There was no reasoning with Aglam. But then again, was he right? Wasn't she still putting her own needs before everyone else's? Was her own craving for making amends distorting her judgment? Still determinedly looking away from Aglam and up towards the beach, she demanded, And what is it that you are going to do instead? Watch your human soldiers melt? That won't need to happen, Loella. You are going to get the blade hand to stop the lava flow. Preferably before the Order of the Blade completes their preparations to leave this island. Loella caught her breath, turning her body around in the water back towards King Aglam. I thought you had said last night that you were going to talk with her. Aglam snarled. I did. As you well know, that uppity little squire of hers informed me she still won't grant me an audience. Loella accusingly pointed at the king. So why is it that you still haven't gathered the nerve to apologize to her for killing her sister and then wearing her remains around your neck? It was Aglam's turn to blush, as he quietly admitted, I am prepared to do that. Loella's eyebrows were raised. Aglam? Demonstrating the smallest shred of decency? That was a first. The king, seeing Loella's shocked expression, explained. I explained to that squire that I was ready to offer a formal public apology. By the day, and I offered financial compensation for her loss, memorial services, everything and anything I could think of. She wouldn't hear of it. Senator Loella quietly spoke as she observed, Well, you certainly have taken your time coming around. I can hardly blame her for doubting your sincerity, given the fact that you've waited until this last, most desperate moment to apologize. King Aglam began swimming closer, ever so slowly towards Loella. You still think it's all about my ego, don't you? Senator, consider our people. Have you forgotten our own history so quickly? It wasn't my choice that my ancestors decided to use their throne to conquer the other sea kings. My brother, King Orlam, did not choose to inherit a throne cemented on an empire that had been taken by force and blood. Loella froze, again disbelieving what she was hearing. This was not the King Aglam she had come to know over these weeks spent on Causus. And what did any of this have to do with the war? Aglam continued his tirade. Everything I have done here is to keep my people united, Senator. The attack on the Senate Rotunda didn't just cost me a brother, it gave our peoples across all of Belli a rallying cry to gather around. Are you so wrapped up in your selfish quest for redemption that you have forgotten that for once our people are doing something together instead of against each other? Senator Loella managed to recover, albeit briefly, from Aglam beginning to make at least a little sense. And the way you treat the humans here is what? Just you being charitable? They expect it, Senator. All the merfolk, crustacean, finned, mammals, and otherwise. That is one of the only other things they can agree on. Do I care as much for the humans as I do my own people? No, of course I don't. And they know it. But I know we need them, Loella, as well as they know it too. I wouldn't ever be the king to leave them here to die. Open your eyes and see what is happening, Senator. If my efforts for this war fails, we will lose much more than any one king's or senator's ego. These Belli will lose the one unifying thing we have had in our long history, a sense of national pride. And I think even you could guess where that loss would leave our people. Loella's shoulders slackened as she pondered the consequences. That could destroy everything. They wouldn't be united anymore. Loella shuddered as she thought of what her history tutor had shared with her so long ago. All the various sapient dwellers of the seas in open conflict, no one safe, no one trusted. It could open the way to civil war. King Aglam was close enough now to gently lift Loella's chin with his finger. Now, perhaps, you understand why I needed to talk with you in private, Senator. I need you to let go of your ego and help me continue fighting this war so that we can stop an even bigger one from happening. I need you to go see Blade Hand Aeltha and convince her to help us. Remember, as far as she or anyone else is concerned, I am still a short-sighted, arrogant king. Nothing we've discussed here reaches anyone else's ears. Are we clear? Loella furrowed her brow, nodding, but also marveling at Aglam's revelations. So all your boorishness has been an act, then? Aglam shook his head, sneering as he swam just past Loella, looking up beyond the surface of the bay waters towards where he knew his forces were scrambling to prepare for the lava flow. No, Senator. I consider myself an excellent actor, but not even I am that good. I am not some chivalrous ideologue wearing the disguise of a bigoted spoiled royal. My boorishness, as you call it, is my own. My own prosperity and way of life depend on a united kingdom, after all. And I do think that these humans are often more trouble than they are worth and complain too easily about their role in our society. Everyone, even I, has to accept the role we've been given. The humans are the foot soldiers, and merfolk are their born leaders. That's the way it's always been, and the way it'll always be. The way it always has to be," the king added, somewhat somberly. Aglam turned his attention back towards Loella after a moment, a confused expression on his brow. "Speechless, I see. That's a first. I'll have to remember to give you a dose of reality like this every now and then if it shuts you up, Senator." Loella crossed her arms, seeing Aglam in a new light, but most assuredly determined not to grant him any leeway. "Speaking of reality, are you ever going to explain what really happened on Drayor's Isle?" Aglam scowled. "You know my answer to that, Loella. As I have told you for weeks, that lizard is not to be trusted. I can spot liars very well, and Zradka is in this war for herself, and herself alone. She will manufacture whatever lies she will about us to rally her people against our forces. Besides, do you honestly think anything I could tell you about a barren hump of rock on the other side of our territory would change anything about what we have discussed here today?" Loella didn't respond, not satisfied with Aglam's deflection, yet unsure of how to get him to be more forthcoming. Aglam continued, "Regardless, as you pointed out earlier, we are short on time. So, do I have your assistance in this matter? Are you going to go talk to the Blade Hand or not?" Loella frowned, disappointed. She had pressed the king for weeks for details about Drayor's Isle, and though getting a straight answer from Aglam was always a gamble, the king's frankness during their discussion had given Loella some hope, only to see it crushed. "Yes, I will," she agreed. As she began to swim away, she briefly paused, looking over her shoulder. "You still could try to be a better merman, Aglam. There are better ways to unite the Maelli than what you are doing. You can be better than this." Aglam began to swim away, back to his war tent. "I don't care to make the time for that, Senator. I will be waiting for your report on your discussion with the Blade Hand. I've already sent someone else there to assist you." And with that, Aglam swam away to the surface, towards a group of guards he had likely ordered to be waiting for him there. And as Loella made her way to the other end of the bay, closer to the Order of the Blade's delegation, she wasn't sure whether to begrudgingly like or hate Aglam more for what he was doing. And there was still the matter about Drayor's Isle that needed to be explained. But, for the time being, she at least could see his logic. And if this was the day that even Aglam was beginning to make sense, then perhaps her civilization really was on the brink of collapse. Loella's palatine bearers bore her as quickly as they could up the small hill towards where the Order of the Blade had their tents pitched. The general scene surrounding the Order of the Blade's camp was an ordered kind of frenzy. Though Aglam had indeed not yet ordered a retreat, that had not stopped many of the soldiers around her from getting their gear packed and ready to go in a moment's notice, just in case. There were also far more soldiers here than usual, the natural result of having recalled all soldiers from a battlefront that was now slowly being consumed by fire. Only those tasked with maintaining the security of the camp's borders were deployed, and Loella privately wondered how long their loyalty to Aglam would last in the face of the creeping flood of lava. The mer-crabs carrying Loella's palatine approached the entrance to the stave-lined camp of the Order. Two of the Order, a human and a minotaur, both stood guard. After Loella briefly explained that she was seeking an audience with the Blade Hand, her palatine was permitted entry and brought forward to Aeltha's tent. She was encouraged to see a familiar face waiting there, a bald, elderly elf in his white healer garb, with twinkling blue eyes. "Zeru! A pleasure to see you again, sir," Loella brightly said, as she greeted the healer with a wave. "Senator Loella. So, you are the other negotiator Aglam referred to. I will have to see if the Blade Hand will consent to meet with us out here. Would your attendants mind giving us a little privacy?" Loella waved them off as they filed away back towards the camp entrance to wait. Zeru in turn sent a nearby soldier to give word to the blade hand that they were ready. Once he was certain that they could speak freely, Zeru walked closer to Loella and asked, "The blade hand should come out in a moment. King Aglam mentioned he was going to have a rather frank discussion with the other negotiator. Forgive my boldness, but I need to know. For one who has been so determined to see the Maeli leave these shores, are you truly prepared to help in this task?" Loella nodded, and in turn inquired of Zeru. "I must admit, I am surprised to see you here as well. I had the impression that you abhorred this war, and would rather we retreat." Zeru sighed, casting a dour look as he looked to the ground. "More than most, I understand the true horrors of war. But, as is my creed as a healer, I am honor bound to offer my services where I am needed, and the king has made it clear that I am needed here. I will do my best to mend this rift between his majesty and the blade hand." Zeru cast a curiously piercing look at Loella as he added, "After all, our best chance for peace was lost several weeks ago." Loella caught her breath, a stabbing guilt grasping her chest. I didn't realize. I had thought—" "That it was the thought that counts, Senator? Oh, how I wish it did. It is a pity that such a lovely and talented young woman as yourself couldn't have stopped all this death. These soldiers have taken it particularly hard, you know. For a brief moment, you would give them a wild fantasy that this nightmare would end, only to have it snuffed out as soon as it ignited." A tear began to drop from Zeru's left eye as Senator Loella looked up, dumbstruck. She had never seen any healer speak this way to her before, or anyone else for that matter. Living in the privileged position she had for most of her life, experiencing someone else's disappointment in her, especially someone as kindly and gentle as Zeru, devastated her. Zeru locked his gaze with Loella's as he looked up, beginning to stand. "But perhaps this morning you can help make things right. If the blade hand were to truly enter this fight, she could perhaps save these good people and perhaps press the Drakonids back to the negotiating table." Loella was still lost for words when a pair of figures emerged from the blade hand's spacious blue and white tent. She had to collect herself, had to put on a brave face, as she raised her spear to offer her own respect to the blade hand. Not her old one she had lost in her duel with Zradka, but a look-alike spear. She steeled herself to the task the currents had brought her. Zeru was right. This was a chance to make things right. The first avian to emerge from Aeltha's tent was likely the squire Loella had come to hear so much about. Brown-feathered and well-built, his leather armor was without any flaws, not having seen any use in battle, but ready for it. As he turned to sit down in a circle with Loella and Zeru, Aeltha appeared, with her large owl-like eyes, bedecked in her own unique white and blue leather armor, featuring the swirling glyph of Prokelha, the god shard of storms, on the shoulders. Loella kept her spear up, and Zeru kept standing until the blade hand had taken her seat in the circle. Zeru took the initiative and introduced himself. "Blade hand, I am Chief Healer Zeru, and this is Senator Loella." He briefly gestured towards Loella, who tilted her head in further deference to Aeltha. "We are honored that you have deemed it fit to meet with us." Aeltha looked at Zeru and Loella with a measured, opaque expression. She was so young, Loella thought, and yet this young woman bore perhaps the greatest responsibility of anyone in the present company. Loella looked at the banishing blade, in its scabbard and affixed to the avian's belt. Never did Loella think that she would have the chance to be this close to it, let alone see it in her lifetime. It was a very simple-looking sword, with its only distinguishing features being its curved hilts, pointing towards the end of the blade, as well as the runes on the blade itself that Loella knew must be hidden beneath its scabbard. Besides the blade, Aeltha seemed to be holding on to something else in her pocket, something purple, but too buried for her to hazard any guesses as to what it was. Aeltha spoke next, in a steady, even tone, drawing Loella's attention back to her face. It was almost as if the blade hand had scripted this moment for quite some time. "Thank you, Healer Zeru and Senator Loella. This is my squire, Pathan, who will join us this discussion. I have come to value his insights and request that he be allowed to stay as we discuss your proposal." Zeru and Loella both nodded, granting their assent. Zeru turned first to Loella, and with an eager, knowing look, asked, "Senator Loella, would you like to be the first to clarify our request?" Loella nodded quickly, still discomfited by the healer's chastisement, but choosing to focus on the present, most urgent task. "Of course." Then, reaching into a small wooden compartment in the floor of her palatine, Loella took out a small jar and presented it to Aeltha. "Before I begin, Blade Hand Aeltha, I have a gift that I wish to give you, if you would allow it." Pathan stood, took the jar, and opened it. "It smells pretty nice, whatever it is," Pathan observed. "What is it?" Loella explained. "It is Smyrna, a fragrance that my people use during our burials. It helps give the family of the deceased the opportunity to pay their last respects before they give their final goodbyes." Aeltha's look softened somewhat. Pathan asked, "Forgive my ignorance, but don't merfolk bury their people underwater? Will this Smyrna truly work for us?" Loella gave an understanding smile. "I also represent humans from my district, Squire Pathan. They are my people too, and this is what they use. I only hope you accept it as a token of my own condolences for your loss." Pathan bowed his head slowly, thanking Loella, and placed the jar to his immediate right. Loella continued, "I do not condone what King Aglam did to your sister. It is well known that he and I do not see eye to eye in many respects. He is often coarse, unapologetic, and short-sighted. He has, however, indicated to me that he does regret his actions, and seeks your forgiveness and your assistance, if it can be given." Aeltha did not speak for several seconds, not breaking the silence that followed Loella's brief speech. Then, finally, Aeltha spoke. "I am aware that the Maeli king regrets what he did, and while this is a significant improvement, I must decline his request for my forgiveness or my assistance," Aeltha quietly, yet resolutely stated. Loella looked forward, careful to try to demonstrate an eagerness to help as she did so. "I cannot fault you for that decision, Aeltha. What he did was most wrong, and even more so because of his petulance in not seeking your forgiveness earlier." Grasping the edge of her palatine, Loella pleaded, "But I must respectfully ask, Blade Hand, is one merman's pride enough to condemn thousands to death?" Pathan intervened. "Aeltha isn't condemning the Maeli to death. King Aglam can retreat if he so chooses." "But you know him better than that. Both of you must know him better than that," Loella insisted. "Do you really think that when his pride, and the pride of this nation, is on the line, that he wouldn't be the kind of fool to put off a retreat until the very last moment? This bay is the only feasible access to Stradthrix, and so he knows that giving the order for his troops to retreat would mean the end of the war for him. Maelli do not retreat. And even if he gets it through his waterlogged head that retreat is his only option, that realization is not going to come in time to save all these soldiers. This is a disaster just waiting to happen, Blade Hand. But you can stop it before it happens. You can drive back these lava flows. With the power that the blade gives you, you can make sure that thousands are saved from the flame. Is not this a worthy goal? Is not this why your order was founded? Aeltha frowned, thinking. Pathan quickly came to her defense. But what of the Drakonids? They believe they have the upper hand. If they see Aeltha having finally taken a side by helping you, they will come after her with everything they have. Defending herself would mean more death, Pathan argued. Are you suggesting that Aeltha is responsible for choosing who lives and who dies? More Maelli or more Drakonids? Are you telling her to play God? Zeru then decided to interject. With respect, no one is suggesting that, Squire. Believe me, I know better than most what the Blade Hand can do, and she can, if she wills it, bring this war to a quick conclusion, with minimal casualties for both sides. Aeltha seemed piqued. She maintained a hollowed, quiet voice as she inquired, What do you mean by that, Chief Healer? What do you mean when you say you know this better than most? Zeru closed his mouth, looking downwards toward the ground, as if the past was right there, playing its memories out in the middle of the small company. I mean, you are not the first blade hand I have seen bear that sword, my lady. Loella rose an eyebrow, her earlier trepidation about Zeru temporarily forgotten at this revelation. Seeing all eyes fixed on him, Zeru seemed to decide further explanation was called for. It is no secret that I am old, even for one of my own people. What is perhaps not as well known is exactly how old I am. A secret that, for reasons that may soon become obvious, I often prefer to keep to myself. You see, Aeltha, I am just over 2,000 years old, Zeru stated matter-of-factly. 3 sets of eyes widened to their fullest at this. Pathan was the first to voice what was dawning on Loella. If that is true, then, by the Daean, you were there. You lived through the throne wars. A grim shadow fell over Zeru as a chill went down Loella's spine. Zeru continued, Very good, Squire. Though, this actually also means that the only thing here older than the blade Lady Aeltha holds is me. An even deeper chill washed over the senator, and from the looks of Pathan and Aeltha, they too were having just as much difficulty processing this news. Then, began Aeltha, you mean to say that the first blade hand you met was Yale himself? Zeru's face went blank. I didn't meet him, per se, but I did witness him use the banishing blade for that very first time. Pathan and Aeltha's feathers bristled with awe, and Loella completely forgot why she was there for a moment, as she heard Zeru recount a memory that to her had been but a story, told over and over again as a legend. Yes, I was born during the reign of the Dread King. Everything was very different back then, you must understand. So much of our world was covered with so many more cities and people. all under the control, of course, of the Endless Sovereign. I was very young when the rebellion began. I lived in Regnath, the capital city of the Dread King's empire, and of the world. Whenever fighting would break out in the city, my parents would have me hide. They would go outside to try to keep our house, and me, safe. They would always come back, not telling me everything, but I knew. The streets of Regnath were filled with dead, every time. "Was it the Dread King?" Loella suddenly asked. "Was it his death site?" Zeru nodded, a stern, focused look on his face, as he continued to look at that same patch of soil in their midst. "Yes. No wounds, no blood. Just their last looks of terror, frozen on their faces. How many he had killed just by using that godshot of his, I don't know. One day, during another attack, it lasted too long. I remember being scared, and I wanted my mother and father. I tried looking for them and went outside, even though I knew it would be dangerous, even though the clamor of the battle was at its fiercest pitch. That's when I saw Yale, the first blade hand." Zeru looked straight into Aeltha's stunned eyes. "He flew above me, faster than I have ever seen anything move in my life since. I afterwards learned that he was specifically chosen for his mission because of this unsurpassed flying ability. As I looked to where he was flying, I saw that last great battle. The middle of Regnath had been pulverized to burning rubble, as wielders of all the nations desperately fought to keep the Dread King occupied. I was quite far from the scene, but could still see that brownish blur shoot towards the king, as elemental attacks all around him held his attention. Yale, whose name I only learned after, soared in from overhead and struck the final blow by surprise. I didn't understand at first the significance of what had just happened. I had heard of so many assassins and would-be kingslayers that had tried to kill the Dread King, even succeeding in wounding him with what should be a fatal blow, only to have him ignore the blow and immediately kill them with but a thought. That's one thing the storytellers these days sometimes get wrong. Deathsight didn't require the king to look at you to kill you. All he had to do was know where you were, or even just hear you to have your life end on his whim. Anyway, when the fighting stopped and the cheers started ringing forth, I knew something different had happened. I slowly came to know that something completely different, completely unprecedented and impossible, had happened. The immortal God that had governed us, that had been my ruler for my whole life and longer, had been killed, slain by the very blade you hold here, Lady Aeltha. And with that, all eyes turned to the banishing blade, innocuously sitting there. Time itself seemed to stand still as Loella saw Zeru's tale play out in her mind. No one spoke or otherwise interrupted Zeru as he walked towards Aeltha and, grasping her hand, looked into her eyes and urged her, "You are the living descendant of Yale, Aeltha. Like him, I know you can bring an end to all this death. For as talented as Yale was as a skymancer, it was the blade that magnified that power to allow him to fly as he did. Using this power wisely to bring an end to the worst chapters of Mundarian history. That is the very purpose for which this banishing blade had been forged. With its power, you can halt this lava flow, and with but a single slice of that blade, kill the leader of the Drakonids, and thereby force them to finally consider a peace with the Maeli. Silence fell over Aeltha as she looked at Zeru and then back at the blade. The anticipation hung thickly in the air, as heavily as if the very ghosts of the past were listening, waiting for her response. Then Aeltha stood. She looked at each member of the circle once more. Then, tears streaming to her eyes, she shook her head and began walking back to her tent. Even Zeru was at a loss for words. Loella looked on in utter disbelief and found her voice first. "Please, Lady Aeltha, we need you! You are the only one who can end all this for good, please!" Aeltha did not slow or stop, however. She took her steadied, measured pace back into her tent. Baffled, Zeru and Loella turned to Pathan. The squire had watched Aeltha go back through the tent door as well, and then he turned towards Zeru and Loella. After a moment, he spoke. "I will talk with her. See if there's anything you can do to get Aglam to see sense. I might be able to convince her." Zeru and Loella both breathed, a little relieved, though still very worried. Loella responded, "Thank you, Squire Pathan. We will do what we can." And, with an inscrutable look on his face, Zeru left abruptly. Loella knew without having to ask that she'd have to be the one to seek Aglam out, as Zeru would likely be overseeing the preparations for his healers and patients, who now likely would have to be ready for evacuation on a moment's notice. And so, calling her mercrabs to her again, she ordered them to take her directly to Aglam, her mind still racing with thoughts of fate, history, and her own shortcomings. Again, she had run away. Again, Aeltha couldn't face her responsibility. A responsibility that should have been her sister's, but now was hers. Why did they want her to kill? Why the Drakonid Archchief? And not Aglam? Why either of them? Aeltha ripped the scabbard off from her belt, casting the banishing blade to the ground as she paced frantically. She wasn't Yale. Why couldn't anyone understand that? She wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or, most importantly, brave enough. Aeltha took out the purple parchment she had been holding in her pocket. She had told herself to stop looking at it, that reading her prophecy again wouldn't change anything, but she couldn't help it. As she read it again, she found no comfort and felt utterly alone. For in the golden lettering, there on the purple parchment that had been delivered to her just the day before, by the Cthulhu who had written it, read the words, "Long life and peace will be hers and more, at the cost of being forgotten, should the blade hand stay from war. But if Aeltha chooses to fight, glory immortal, a hero remembered she'll be, at the cost of losing her life." Thank you so much for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a rating for us to let us know what you liked in this episode. You can also support us on patreon.com. Just look for Mundaria Legends or use the link in the description. And remember, one of the simplest, easiest ways you can support us is simply by letting a friend know about the show. Thank you again so much for listening, especially as we just get started. Stay safe and remember, you can't see the hero if you don't know the monster.